So good morning, League members, and good morning, Engine. Thank you for logging on this morning, and thank you, Engine, for presenting today. I'm Pat Collins, the coordinator for MEEC, and today's topic will be the BioKey Identity and Access Management. Now, the contract that supports this topic is the IT Security Services and Solutions contract. Your host this morning is Jonathan Lee, who is the Sales Marketing Manager, LLC for Engine. Jonathan, will you introduce your presenter?
Yes, thank you, Pat. And thank you, everybody, for being on today. I'm Jonathan Lee. I'm with Engine LLC. We're a 30-year-old small business managed service provider in the Washington, D.C. area. We provide services to over 100 SMBs as well as state, local, and education. We are on the MEEC contract vehicle for hardware and IT security solutions and services. As Pat mentioned, we do offer several solutions on the IT security solutions and services contract, and BioKey is one of them. So I'm happy to introduce BioKey. They offer identity and access management solutions. So today, BioKey has offered to join us so that we can bring you a presentation that breaks down multi-factor authentication. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to you, Kim.
Great, thanks, Jonathan, and hi, everybody. Thanks for joining us today, or if you're listening in to the recording, happy you're listening in. So I'm Kimberly Biddings, VP of Product here at BioKey International. As Jonathan mentioned, we are an identity and access management provider. And under that scope, we do cover and offer multi-factor authentication, which, as we'll cover in today's session, is a very, very hot topic, if not one of the hottest topics out there. And so hopefully today's session really gives you a deeper dive into exactly what MFA or multi-factor authentication is, how to implement it, how to make those decisions about what type you need to have in certain places, and then a little bit of background about us in terms of being experts in higher education for over 20 years. So as I mentioned, why are we talking about multi-factor authentication, or as I'll refer to it as the rest of the presentation, MFA? First of all, I don't think it's any secret at this point that the cybersecurity landscape is very rough. If you look at some of these stats, every 39 seconds, there's a new cyber attack happening somewhere on the web. 4,000 ransomware attacks are taking place around the world daily. You have a 300% increase in cyber crime since the COVID pandemic. And really, the bad actors had a field day when it came to the pandemic, right? Everybody went remote. We all moved to cloud services. And a lot of the secondary question was not so much getting the services to people that needed it, but so much as now what do we do to secure it? And so a lot of gates were opened, a lot of floodgates were opened. The concept of having four walls of an organization to protect yourself really went out the window when COVID came in. And then the other huge force that we're seeing is really on cyber insurance. So usually the regulations, right, HIPAA, GDPR, PCI, CGIS, some of those other compliance methods or regulations are what drives a lot of security best practices. But what we're seeing now is that cyber insurance and cyber insurers are driving most of the conversation around some of these security controls, including MFA. And you can see here that even if you meet some of their requirements, so a lot of policies are going from 7 questions that you had to answer last year to 3.5 pages of security controls, the rates are still going up. I've seen rates as high as 80, 85%. I've also seen a 200 to 300% increase for institutions that are not able to meet the security controls that are in the cyber policy. So that's a huge driving force in terms of forcing people to have multi-factor authentication. Now, obviously, we want to talk a bit about institutions, right? Higher education institutions. What are we seeing from trends and attacks? And, I don't need to tell most of this audience that attacks are happening on institutions of all sizes, but it's really reached this critical point. So 75% of ransomware attacks on higher education institutions succeeded, and that was from last year. We saw a wave of attacks happen in April thanks to a group called Black Cat. And the damage that's being done, right, because students are now remote or faculty and staff are even remote, classes and exams are completely canceled because they're online. Sometimes it actually forces institutions to offer different services, spin up different services, and again, then those are vulnerable. But ultimately, they go after the systems and university networks. I think the main thing that I would highlight is it's not so much, it is about data loss, right? Of course, protecting data and keeping it safe is obviously what we're all trying to do. But when a breach or a ransomware attack or something happens, it's actually a brand and reputational damage and even impacts student enrollment. Students want to feel safe, right? They want to feel like their information is safe. And those generations now coming in are very tech savvy in terms of what that means. I think the most detrimental case that I looked at and heard about, maybe some of you heard about there, was really looking at Lincoln College. And so Lincoln College it's a rural school in Illinois, and it was established 157 years ago. And they finally had to close their doors. And that was due to a cyber attack they could not recover from, as well as some of COVID-19. But that's one of the historic landmark cases where not only is cyber attacks stealing data, data breaches, and impacting security, but it's actually shutting down an institution. So this has become a critical point. This is why we're talking about multi-factor authentication today, and really how do you strengthen your security. So I do want to open it up for a poll question. We're going to use the chat functionality due to the GoToMeeting. But here's the poll question. Please answer or provide your responses. So, do you have multi-factor authentication in place today? Your options to add to the chat are: we have it for all access everywhere, some access, we do not have multi-factor authentication, or I am not sure. So we'll give folks a few minutes to just answer, provide some of the commentary just to give myself and Jonathan a little bit of perspective on who's out there. One of the things that I want to highlight, as you can see on this, is multi-factor. The reason it's talked about so much, and we're going to break it down, is because it's known to prevent up to 90% of cyber attacks. So again, there's a lot of security controls out there. There's a lot of detection, right, protection protocols, things like that. But MFA is the one that's truly proven, when done correctly, to prevent cyber attacks. So great, I see some access, I see all access, so a little bit of a range there. Another all access, which is great. So we'll talk about deploying it. We'll talk about some options. Also open it up to Q&A, throughout the presentation, as really we cover all gamuts in terms of more advanced approaches for MFA as well. So what is it, right? For just a baseline to make sure everybody's on the same page, and anyone listening in, MFA I always think of as that front door. Now, not the front door in terms of the walls of your building or your campuses or anything like that, but it's essentially, and I'll talk about the digital version of the front door in just a minute, but when we're talking about multi-factor, I talk about people letting people into your home. And depending on how many controls you have, if it's just a simple key, right, to unlock the door, that may be something that actually is stronger because someone has to have the key to get in. A PIN code may be something that people know and they can push the numbers on the keypad and unlock the front door. And then when you start combining, let's say you need a key and a PIN code and you need to look into the Ring camera, video camera, now you're really adding a lot more security to that front door. The other thing is, obviously, it makes it harder for people to get in, even people that are authorized, if not done correctly. And what this all goes back to, what I think people should always keep in mind when we're talking about multi-factor authentication, is how are you establishing trust? How do you know for sure and trust who or what is at your front door and what's getting in? The reason I say what is a common challenge that we're seeing in multi-factor authentication is most of the methods that we're using to actually prove or trust somebody is allowed to access something is based on something that you have, right? Phone-based methods came out, such as push tokens or SMS OTPs, and everybody thought these are the most convenient things. And we're seeing more and more, and even since 2016, NIST actually said SMS messages are unencrypted and actually very vulnerable to attacks. We're seeing more that the reason these bad actors can get through the front door of your house is because all we're establishing trust on is a phone. And I joke with people, I say, imagine if a giant iPhone knocked on your front door and I'm like, hey, that's Jonathan's phone, I think, come on in, iPhone. You know, in so many words, it's kind of silly, but it is essentially what systems are starting to trust and allow to happen. And I want you to keep that in mind when we start talking about your strategy, especially for those people that have it everywhere, is do you really know who's behind the screen? Do you really know who's behind the device? Especially when it's really important, right? When it's a really critical transaction or engagement. So this is the digital equivalent of that front door, right? It's a login screen. So a lot of times people ask me, well, multi-factor authentication, I'm not sure I've seen it, used it, etc. By now, most of us use it in all of our lives, everyday lives, when we log into a bank account, mobile app, or any type of login screen. You're usually offered or even forced to provide a second factor at the very minimum. To define it, right, in terms of multi-factor authentication, so what I tell people is it was really easy to have someone walk up to you, show them your driver's license, say I am Jonathan, right, and shake my hand, and then there's established trust there as we continue our conversation or our transaction. And since we all went digital, and even more so in COVID, that everything's happening digitally, especially with students, right, going off campus, bringing education instead of them coming to you, you going to them. Now it's all about identities of really figuring out, okay, the fact of being who or what a person or thing is, but more so how do you prove that when they're not in front of you or that digital barrier exists. In terms of authentication, it's really that act or that process of proving or showing something is true, genuine, and valid. And so I'd like to give this example for not only multi-factor, but people ask me, okay, what's identity and access management? Well, identity is that digital identity. And we're working really to allow access and protect access and manage access, right? That's the whole idea behind it. When it comes to multi-factor authentication, it's really about combining multiple authentication methods to prove you are who you say you are. Now, for any security buffs out there, obviously the definition goes slightly deeper to say that it has to be 2 of these 3 categories at least. It can't be 2 from the same category. I remember when 2-factor first came out, decade ago at least, banking, they put in a password and then they put in a challenge question like, what's your mother's maiden name? It doesn't work. They're both something that you know. And so what we're looking at here is something you know, password, PIN, security questions, something you have, which is really that dominating category at this point. That's what the industry is standardized on. That's what FIDO, for example, is a very popular protocol now to go passwordless and remove passwords. It's all in that something you have category. And then the something you are category is truly biometrics or centralized biometrics, what we call identity-bound biometrics. And that's using fingerprint, face, palm, voice, iris, a whole multitude of morphological factors as well as behavioral factors as well. The interesting part is that most logins I've seen with all the customers, we have over 300 higher ed institutions that they've actually deployed, it really is 2-factor. Most of it is also something you know, like a password plus something you have method. So a password plus a push token, a password plus a authenticator app code the person has to type in. And then I'm actually seeing passwordless trends going back to single factor, which that's a whole nother webinar I could give on the security concerns with that, but that's another trend that we're seeing as well. Most folks do not have true multi-factor authentication put in place unless it's on privileged accounts, very sensitive information like research data, and other scenarios. So most of the time we talk about multi-factor, 2-factor, we interchange them. But the thing I want to encourage all of you to consider, especially for those that say you have it across all access, is are you including options from these 3 categories? And the reason I ask that is that that's something you have where we really over-index very heavily on most options being that something you have method. Are you ready when all those methods start failing like they are? Do you have a backup? Do you have something to reinforce that with the something you are category as well? So very important you take a holistic strategy and you have options that include all 3 different methods. Now, again, looking at those front doors, where do they exist? Where do we put multi-factor authentication? They really exist at the application layer. So a lot of times we're trying to secure applications, front door to applications. That includes mobile authentication and mobile access to apps. Also, desktop is a huge use case where you want that really strong, secure login getting into the machine in the first place. And then, of course, servers, infrastructures, a lot of the things that IT departments or IT management is going to be accessing. And so that's where we're seeing a lot of those login requirements. I've also seen things like allowing IoT devices to access certain systems. There's obviously other complex ones, but the answer to where do you need multi-factor, it is everywhere. You need to have at least some form of strong authentication well beyond a password and not a 20-character password to protect these quote unquote front doors of these login screens that people are accessing. So now I'm going to switch gears a little bit. We defined it. We've gone through the different methods. I want to talk a little bit about implementing MFA because this is really something that I think is the biggest challenge. Picking the methods, working with people, it's all about change management. And that's really where it gets pretty tricky for folks, especially as you roll it out to certain groups. I love the stories, by the way. I'm always surprised. Most of the time I hear students are really quick to adopt, but then faculty and staff, there's always a few there that are pretty resistant, especially to using their own personal phones. So it varies widely. And that's the thing to remember when you're implementing MFA is people are on the other side of these solutions, right? It's not just some device. Somebody owns that and they want to access their online courses, their student portal. Faculty wants to log into their email to be able to check in on what's going on for the day. People are behind these solutions, and we'll talk about why that's so important. But these are 5 simple steps to basically getting through implementing multi-factor. First of all, you have to assess risk. You can't know where you need tighter security if you don't know how much risk exists, both inherent and residual risk. And so that means doing asset inventory. That means understanding exactly what applications you have, where the data is, how sensitive is that data, what happens if that application goes down or gets ransomed. All those questions have to be asked to assess the risk situation. By the way, if you're not doing that, I can almost guarantee you and promise you that cyber insurers are looking at that cyber risk. I worked for a company that did security ratings. They quantified cyber risk, and some of the biggest users of those ratings are cyber insurers. So if you're not looking at your risk, and that's on a continuous basis, whether you've already rolled out MFA or not, you should be always assessing your risk at all times. The next part of this is picking your authentication methods. I'm going to go through an example in just a moment, but again, the main thing is that you give people flexibility and you give them multiple options. It does not work, for example, to roll out push tokens on mobile devices to everybody, faculty, staff, and students. There's a lot of use cases where people don't have phones. Certain demographics, I just saw a great study from Pew Research that basically said 60 to 80% of most groups have smartphones, but then that means that 20 to 40% do not. So you have to have other options. And a lot of times what people do is they roll out a huge solution, it's all phone-based, and ultimately they come back to me and go, hey, I can't use phones for everybody. Do you have hardware tokens, or is there a better choice? And there are definitely better choices. The other part is defining security policies. We'll also talk about those, but those control what happens in the actual front door, that login process. So in our product, it's all centralized. You simply check boxes, okay, I want students to use Duo, Microsoft Authenticator, and a fingerprint scan, and they can pick for any of those 3 methods, for example. Those are all controlled in your security policies. And they're either defined at the group, OU, or individual level, or even at the application level. So your SIS, for example, you want to have protected by these factors at all times. Communication strategy, I'll talk about that. You're all going to need to put on your marketing hat to roll this out successfully, and then definitely a phased rollout. It's very hard to do en masse because everyone has unique use cases, unique situations. I have worked with community colleges that have done rollouts all at once. But again, they did a lot of upfront work for communication. One of the best ones I'll talk about in just a moment. I love the campaign that one of our customers did, and I'll highlight that. So we talked a bit about the people, right? And that gets back to picking the right method. You have to look at who the person is, where do they access, what are they accessing, And of course, what's required? What's any compliance requirements or standards that you actually have to put in place? So here, for example, let's say the student is remote, they're accessing their student portal, and it's to gain access to other apps through that student portal using single sign-on. An authenticator app, like a Microsoft Authenticator app or Google Authenticator app, could be just fine to access that information. Now, when they go to access their financial aid, you might want to enforce some step-up authentication to say, hey, we require a little bit more control or stronger authentication at this point. But for the most part, accessing student information in student portals, you want to be pretty seamless, fairly easy for them to use, but still strong and out of band and not based on passwords. However, if you have a student, for example, that's taking an exam, it's a great example that I give, right? We went remote, you have students that are off campus, you don't see them in person. How do you know for sure that that student actually took the exam, that Mary, who was assigned to take it, is the one that actually took the exam? And that's really where the something you are category comes in. Again, we have the identity bound biometrics. For Mary, a simple palm scan using a mobile app actually verifies her palm centrally to say she is who she is behind that device. It's not just her device or her token or something that she knows like a password. You're actually verifying that the person is who they say they are. So there are great use cases, for example, research labs, shared workstations, right? All of those scenarios where you need to be absolutely certain and verify the person completing a transaction. That's when we bring in those something you are category methods that are much, much stronger and don't rely on devices or tokens. So again, remember the person, think about what they access, where they access, and then what's required. Then when you look at methods, right, the whole push and pull about methods, as you've heard me talk about, is usability versus security. Ultimately, it's been the same since I started my career a while ago. I won't talk about how long ago, but it really is this balancing, whether you call it convenience and security or ease of use, it really doesn't matter. It comes back to, can the person use it, and is it keeping the information, the data, et cetera, secure based on the amount of risk? We have a great white paper. I have it linked at the end of this presentation that ranks all of the methods, all of the authentication methods that we anyway currently support, but it's most of the industry offerings out there. And you can see things like an SMS OTP is slightly easy to use, but it's really poor on security. Push notifications. So many schools I've seen out there have rolled out push notifications using somebody like a Duo, for example, to do that. Very usable, right? Super easy, click confirm, you're done. You don't even need to unlock your phone. But from a security perspective, it's much lower on the security scale. Plus, we're seeing it go down more given that it allowed Russian-based hackers to happen last year. And we're seeing what's called MFA bombing. The hackers essentially constantly pushing that notification until someone says, fine, I confirm. So again, it's about the trade-off. You have to think about the risk. What's present? What do I really need to secure? And then how is that going to be usable for the person on the other side? The other considerations is total cost, effort of implementation, the ongoing maintenance, and phone-based or not. One of the things I've seen very common in higher education, I was just at EDUCAUSE a few weeks ago, is that, like I said, we roll out all phone-based and realize there's a portion of users that can't use phone. And then I call it kind of the hardware token punishment. Okay, if you can't use your phone, you're going to have to carry this thing around with you. Now, we sell them. They have a place in life, as does every other method, but the total cost of a hardware token investment or a FIDO token investment is very high. You have to buy multiple ones per user. They're usually going to lose them or forget them. When they leave or there's turnover or any type of that thing, it's hard to recover those. And then your IT team is spending time on shipping, inventory, maintenance, managing all of those factors that go into managing an actual physical inventory. So again, it's a good alternative to phones, but you have to know what kind of overhead you're taking on when you bring on something like that method, which is those hardware tokens. Okay, so always consider those. And again, we have full write-up I'll share at the end of every single method based on pros and cons. And then, like I said, you have to know your policies. So for example, I run the marketing department here. I have to know, okay, I want the marketing department, this is what they access, this is what they can use, this is where they're located. And this policy is actually going to say what they can or cannot use for factors. On the right-hand side is a screenshot actually from the platform that we offer. And these are centralized security policies. And you can see here, this is the login. We do this also for password resets, VPN, desktop 2FA, all's configurable, very granular. But this is saying, okay, everyone that's logging in this policy called the marketing department is going to have to use two-factor authentication. And then you can see here some of the mobile or the OTP methods that are allowed are things like phone, push token, mobile authenticator. So again, it's very important because all of this, the end user, what they see as options is all controlled by a centralized security policy. So that's really what you need to get in place. And by the way, security policies are written. A lot of people miss that step. They implement something like this, but you should have an overarching security policy that defines what cybersecurity is in your higher education institution. Now, I talked about you having to put a marketing hat on. And for anyone that's rolled out MFA, which I know most of you have, communication is absolutely key to this. Rolling out multi-factor authentication, I worked with one of our community college customers. I have two stories actually. One I worked with, they said, can you help me with a campaign to roll out MFA? Here's our emails. And they were rolling out single sign-on as well. And it said, hello, everybody. We are rolling out multi-factor authentication. We will use these methods. We're going to give you single sign-on, and it's going to secure your access. Please be prepared, in so many words. We flipped it on its head to really follow this best practice, which was make sure you know why the person cares on the other side of the communication. And so what we did is we changed it to say, look, we want you to help us keep our institution safe. We're doing these extra controls to help do that. And then on top of that, we're going to remove all these pesky passwords for you with single sign-on. Again, getting away from the tech and helping focus on why a faculty member, why a staff member, why the students care that you're putting in these security controls is all about marketing, messaging, and marketing focus. The other side, College of the Canyons is a very well-loved customer that I have. They're very close to us, longtime customer. And they decided to pick May 4th to roll out MFA to absolutely everybody. And as you can imagine, it had a Star Wars theme and May the 4th be with you. And it was wildly successful. And it got people rallied and had some fun with it. So again, you have to put on your marketing hat. You want to define your goals, know your audience, know the why, clear call to action in each communication that you use. And then I say use omni-channel. Email is one way. Student portal notifications is another. Having open office hours on a webinar is another method. So again, really think about marketing strategy because a lot of multi-factor success is dependent on change management. The last advice I'll give you is get cyber champions outside of IT. So IT is the one usually, or IT security, is the one rolling this out. Get some faculty members that want to be cyber champions. Have a student body president that wants to be a cyber champion, right? Make sure that you're getting people within the institution on board with your cybersecurity best practices because they'll help evangelize it. They'll help be your case study, so to speak, as to why we should do this and help bring that message forward. And then I want to mention it is an ongoing journey. So even for folks out there, you've done all access. I'm sure you can attest to this. It's always changing. The security landscape is always changing. The next innovation is always changing. Your institutions are always changing. Hey, we want to have the latest and greatest portal infrastructure stood up. How are we going to secure that, right? We definitely want to think about it as an ongoing thing. There's no point in time. You should always have a great handle on your cybersecurity maturity and the program that you have in place. And then understand that there's multiple chapters to go through to mature that process. And that process goes across not only policy, but the technology that you're investing in and the people that are involved. So again, it's great to see that a lot of you have started some of the MFA process, also included in a lot of the access. But remember, it's always changing. For those of you out there that have done all access, I definitely would encourage you to think about something beyond authentication methods. It's a little more advanced. but as adaptive access or adaptive authentication. So the new trend, not even new, actually, I shouldn't say that. We've been talking about it for a decade, is including context around someone logging in. And that's starting to look at, okay, Kim, I'm always in Boston. I live in Boston. I always access between 8 a.m. Eastern and 6 p.m. Eastern. And I access the application at 8 a.m. Eastern in Boston, and all of a sudden there's a login request at 10 a.m. Eastern in Russia. That's a flag, right? That's a concern. So if you start building around context around the authentication methods you're using, the method becomes less reliant or the only dependency you have to prevent risk. So again, a little bit of a more advanced subject, but if you're on that path, you've already deployed MFA, consider adaptive authentication. Last thing I just wanted to wrap up with is really a quick overview of our solution, BioKey Portal Guard. It was Portal Guard originally. BioKey, we acquired the platform, but have been in higher ed for over 25 years. It can be deployed on premise, which a lot of schools or institutions like. It also can be fully hosted in the cloud. And as you can see, it really is the full offering from multi-factor authentication, but we have the unique piece of the identity-bound biometric methods to really prove someone is who they say they are. For example, passwordless is a simple fingerprint scan from a desktop, and then they get single sign-on into all apps. We do single sign-on with CAS protocol. We have mobile auth that does our palm scanning, facial scanning methods for identity-bound biometrics. Self-service password reset. There are so many institutions out there still paying for password reset calls to the help desk. Please contact us. We can reduce them by 95%. And then we have all the hardware options, including our own set of FIDO keys, if you want to go down that path. Over 200 institutions, including 65 community colleges. Prince George's Community College is one of your fellow community members that is a well-loved customer of ours. And then you can see here a whole host of institutions that are loving using Portal Guard across the country. So with that, I promised you I have the ebook. This ranking authentication methods goes through every single method that we support, which is most of the industry standards. All of them are ranked by usability, security benefits, pros and cons, total cost of ownership, all those factors we talked about. And then if you are interested in learning more about our solutions or more about NGen, you can see best to do is contact NGen, contact Jonathan using the Meek website. And Jonathan, I am done talking. I will open it up for questions and see if the audience has any.
Thank you so much, Kim. That was a great presentation.
Sure.
Lots of great information in there. I just wanted to note that I really appreciate it because a lot of times when people talk about MFA, they think it's synonymous with two-factor.
Yes.
And I think one of the things that your presentation does well is really pinpoint how the biometrics really fits in, because as you said, you know, security questions and things about you or things that you know, your phone is something you have, but then there's always that one other aspect that could really tie the whole thing together, and that's where you start including the biometrics. So thank you for that.
Yeah, no problem. And I will proactively say about privacy, right? Because I think being at EDUCAUSE a couple of weeks ago, there's definitely an appetite growing for biometrics, the centrally stored biometric. The next question I typically get is privacy, right? Like, well, what about BIPA and CCPA and all these things? Our system and most centralized biometric systems out there, but us specifically, have designed it for those privacy standards. So our chief legal officer has been at it 20 years. He actually was part of the BIPA writing and policy creation. And a lot of those regulations are all about storage, permission of data, those type of things. And so our product allows the user to delete, enroll, change their biometric information that's being stored. There's consent receipts. There's notices to remove or update biometric storage. But again, I think there's been kind of a hype or a little bit of FUD out there as far as the scary nature of storing biometric data. And having been at this over a decade, I can tell you we're also running out of options, right? All the phone-based, all the hardware tokens being shared, manipulated. It's getting to a point now that we have to bring people back into the trust equation. So if anybody wants to know more about that, happy to talk to people offline about privacy concerns as well.
It looks like somebody sent a question to me privately.
Okay.
So it says, how does BioKeys MFA Solution separate itself from MFA built into cloud applications, Microsoft 365, Google, etc.?
Yeah, so really it's about the breadth of options. So we include, like if you rolled out MS Authenticator or your Microsoft Shop, oftentimes that's good for, like I said, a big portion of your users, but it's not good for everybody. Again, people that don't have smartphones refuse to use their phone. You have to pay for the phone plan. And so what we do is we don't, we're not a rip and replace. We're not saying get rid of Microsoft or get rid of Google. What we do is we say, hey, pull them into these security policies in PortalGuard, and then you have all the other options that we offer, including the identity-bound biometrics, the FIDO keys, all of those at a really affordable price in one set of security policies. So again, it's most authentication solutions out there won't have all three categories, something have and are. And then, like I said, we have the adaptive authentication to layer on top to bring in the geolocation network IP address too.
Great, thanks.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like we have another one. Are there any other solutions, integrations we should be thinking about when it comes to implementing MFA?
Yes, so please implement single sign-on. So some people miss this step, right? MFA is like the most urgent thing because of cyber insurance or others. But look, there's a reason that an IAM platform offers those three things, MFA, single sign-on, self-service password reset. They all work in tandem with each other. So get that really, really strong front door login, right, to maybe the desktop or to an application, a student portal, but then single sign on to everything else. So they're not continuously prompted for logins unless it's necessary. We have a tight relationship with a portal provider, for example. That's why that student experience is modern and works the way it does, is they log in once and then they get SSO to Blackboard, email, SIS, right? From there, they have a lot of access. And then self-service password reset. I talked to a major institution, for example, and he was getting 50 password reset calls a day at $70 a reset estimated. It's $1.2 million in password resets a year. So if you do nothing else, like just please the forget password, allow people to reset their password, use strong authentication methods to do that. But yeah, at this point, that should be something that you've reduced down, and that cost should be removed from your organization.
Awesome. Is there something, this is a personal question of mine because I don't know. So when you're, so with all these different cloud applications and out there that are out there, this might be sort of a single sign-on thing, but there's so many ways to implement MFA for each one of them, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so like you have like your authenticator app on your phone and things like that to kind of like help manage a lot of those different MFA options with these different cloud applications.
Mm-hmm.
The single sign-on solve the problem of having to manage it yourself? Like if you're using single sign-on for all these cloud applications, are you getting those MFA or like the authentication methods or whatever it is through one single platform or like avenue, or do you have to still do it these separate things once you log in, or how does that work?
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it does.
Okay,
So there's two perspectives I can take that. So end user wise, faculty, staff, students, maybe IT. What they're going to see is a strong authentication, like multi-factor. You can use any methods that you want to enable. They gain access, and then some institutions we work with point them directly at a portal. So like a SharePoint portal or an Illusion, a Pathify, something like that aggregates all the apps in one. But we also offer what we call a jump page. So if you log in, you get into PortalGuard, and then there's little tiles that'll say access banner, access Blackboard, access, little clickable things, and it automatically logs them in. The other way that it works too, though, is if I go directly to that link, right? I'll just make up a link, but blackboard.edu or something, right? If I go directly to the web application URL, it'll redirect to PortalGuard and say, whoa, 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 Jonathan, you haven't authenticated. Give us the multi-factor authentication that we're requesting, and then we'll push you right back into that application. It's completely seamless. From the IT side, everything's configured in one central view or pane of glass. So you configure your security policies for authentication, even to the application, but that's also where you set up your SAML assertions, OpenID Connect. We support CAS protocol, which is higher education specific. But all of that's done in one pane of glass. And that should be fairly standard for any IAM solution you put out there. The one that I'll tell you doesn't, and I've talked to a lot of schools about changing it up, is Shibboleth. So Shibboleth, of course, as we know, is open source, a lot of file storage, file management. That is not in a centralized platform. That leaves schools definitely struggling with single sign-on.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sure, no problem.
Are there any other questions? Last call for questions out there. While we're waiting just to see if there's any additional questions, I just want to go over again because some people joined after the initial introduction. I am Jonathan Lee. I'm the sales and marketing manager of Engine. Engine is a small business that's located in Maryland. We're headquartered in Maryland. We're a small business partner of BioKey, and we are on the meat contract for hardware and IT security solutions and services. So BioKey can be procured through Engine, through the meat contract. So I just want to make sure that that's put out there again for anyone who's joined later who is interested in possibly going down that avenue. And then we do have resources here on the screen for our two organizations to reach out to us for additional information or to set up a demo or anything of the sort. So Kim, did you have anything else?
No, I don't. Anyone can find me on LinkedIn, Kimberly Biddings. You can also go to biokey.com. We have a lot of great videos, free trial, tons of white papers, resources on all the subjects that we covered today. But no, I appreciate everybody's time and listening in, and hope everybody's headed down the path of MFA successfully. So
Thanks, Kim.
All right.
Pat, I will leave it to you to close us out unless you have anything else to say.
Yes, so I just want to say thank you so much for a great webinar. Thank you, Kimberly and Jonathan. Thank you for working with me for this. And remember, Kimberly or Jonathan, you send the presentation slides over. Tamara will post it to the Meet website, and I will send it to those that registered today. I'll send it out to them. Thank you so much.
That's great.
Thank you.
Everybody, have a great day.